name is Pam Hoffer, and I am very, very grateful for the opportunity to have my show here. It's kind of like the only thing on my bucket list. And I wrote a little introduction that's on the wall. I might cheat and just use it. My grandmother was an artist, and I got interested, and I even inherited her paints and brushes. I loved art classes in high school, but I kind of left it behind until my kids were born. And my first entree back into art was when I realized I really wanted a three-dimensional sculpture of my daughters. And I figured the only way I'm gonna get that is to make it myself. So I made a few phone calls, including to the Art Center and Marcia Chamberlain and some other folks, and they gave me advice about how to do it. And then I took some sculpting lessons from Norma Penchansky-Lasser. And then when we began to travel to Vermont, it was easier to travel with paint, so I started painting. So I'm pretty much self-taught, and my interest has been in portraiture. I think it's an extension of my interest that fuels my career as a social worker in clinical practice, and I'm interested in bringing out what's inside. So I warn women that I don't do pretty, but I'm really interested in the strengths that people have and try to go after that when I do portraits. So let's see what else. I'm retired now. Most of my creative juices are deployed now in taking care of my husband, who has Alzheimer's since 12 years now. And so let me start with this little painting. This is just a quick portrait of my granddaughter, Maggie. She loves making art, so much so that she set up a table at the sidewalk when she was 7, bringing out all her art equipment and trying to induce passersby to stop and do art. When puzzled, the passersby asked, "What does it cost?" She said, "It's free, it's fun." She's a clear-eyed and truth-speaking little girl who, despite loving me very much, described my skin as shriveled. And this has made me think about using skin cream for the first time in my life. The next one over is Betty Ingram, and I've called this Betty at Ease. She's a friend, neighbor, and generous and skilled gardener. For a few years, when our kids were young and our schedules were regular, we were part of a cooking group in our neighborhood in which 4 families participated. I cooked on Monday, Betty on Tuesday, Jan on Wednesday, and Jill on Thursday at 6 p.m. or so. The one who cooked would phone the others and get somebody to bring over a platter and a tray and a bowl, whatever was needed for dinner that night. And I have spent many, many pleasant afternoons over tea with Betty. She's a dear friend. Next one is my dad. This is about 6 months before he died of idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. There's glass on this. I don't know if the glass will interfere too much. I had never done a portrait of my dad, but decided to do this about 6 months before he died, which he knew he knew that it was a progressive lung disease, and he knew he only had a few more months. At the end of the sitting, he pulled out a typed page, which he wanted me to read, something he'd written as a goodbye message to his friends and family, and he asked me to read it at his memorial service. It was beautiful. I cried and commented, "This is how I feel about life. Maybe I'll use this at my funeral." And he quipped, "Maybe I should get it copyrighted." He was a wonderful man, and his last words 10 minutes before he died were, "It's odd, but I don't think I have ever felt so good." A very conscious going. The next one is Gabriel Chin. I've called this Healer, Gabriel Chin. He's now deceased, but for many years was a local icon in Ann Arbor, teaching Tai Chi on the plaza behind the U of M admin building by the Cube. He was multi-talented and had a devilish sense of humor. He was a poet, an opera singer. He was a linguist, a gourmet cook who catered for a time to people in Ann Arbor, a top marksman in the Chinese army in his youth, and a magical and generous Qigong practitioner. I wanted to capture that energy, so I asked him to pose with his hands outstretched, as they often were when he was doing Qigong. I took several photos and ended up choosing one without that pose, but still felt his energy every moment of painting him. And he really was a devil. One time, he came with me to a friend who was on the 8th floor of U Hospital with cancer and in a lot of pain. And she'd been pressing a morphine drip every 8 minutes or so. And when we went there, he was going to do his Qigong. He, however, was having trouble walking because of his own medical condition, and I was afraid that he needed a wheelchair to go the whole distance from the parking garage to the 8th floor. So I got a wheelchair, but he made me sit in it, and he pushed me and used me as ballast so that the wheelchair was a walker. And he got a big kick out of being, 20, 30 years older than I and pushing me. The next one is of Elise Bolding. Quakers, can you get back here to see it, or does the angle do it justice? Mm-hmm. Okay. Quakers use the term weighty Quaker for a friend who has been very influential, instrumental, centered, and admired for the way in which their life reflects their commitment to values shared by Quakers and others. Simplicity, equality, finding that of God in every person. Elise raised 5 children with her husband, Ken Bolding, the economist. She then took a PhD in sociology and ended up heading the department at Dartmouth for a while. Along the way, she helped found Friends Lake Community in Chelsea, Michigan, Friends World College on the East Coast, and she strengthened many organizations with her work and fine mind. She and Ken lived many years in Ann Arbor. She had a nice, wry sense of humor, once telling me she was off to an international conference on the topic of religion and peacemaking, and she quipped, "Isn't that ironic?" The next painting is a friend's son, Will, at 16. He is just gorgeous. He was on the cusp of manhood, and his look's about to change. I asked if he would allow me to paint him. Will is a deep thinker, sensitive and inquiring, and it has been my privilege to have some really lovely conversations with him. This is my husband, Pam Hoffer. This is a picture of an extraordinary, generous, and wonderful man. My husband is easy to catch seated. Reading was his default mode of operating. And on this occasion, I persuaded him to look up long enough to paint him, though I thought I was going to have to prop his eyes open with toothpicks. He's now more than a decade into Alzheimer's, and he is still a loving, grateful, and joyful man. And though he has no memory for his own reading, he was, before COVID, reading twice a week to 3- and 4-year-olds in the daycare center on Westminster, a daycare center we helped to found in 1970 or so. They call him Papa Phil, and they sit on his feet to try to keep him from leaving at the end of his hour. This guy I didn't really know, but I loved his face. I call this blue collar salt of the earth. He is a chimney mason who we had fix our chimney, and I took photos of his wonderful face in order to paint him. Okay, we'll go down. Up here. Then the last one here, that's my mom, Irene Corbett. In this watercolor, I tried to capture what I see as the strength of my mother's personality and the direct gaze of her intelligence. As in most portraits I do of women, I'm interested more in the strengths of character than what is likely to be surface pretty. And here's our daughter, Amy. Our daughter was caught in a glance while she was reading, and I interrupted her to take a picture. I love this look on her face. She's a gifted potter, carpenter, cook, and gardener, and she's never given a present she did not make. When she was 4, she came out of her room where she'd been cutting and pasting for several hours and said to me, "Mommy, I really like working with my hands." She has passed this trait on to her daughter, Maggie. And Amy is a construction supervisor with Habitat in Denver, but she has a degree in math and taught math to junior high school kids until she just had to get out of a building and get outside. This is Amy when she was little, sleeping on the porch. We have this little cabin we built with the help of friends and our young daughters. It is a precious place in the woods at Friends Lake with no running water, and this was Amy around age 11 in a sleeping bag on the porch of this place. Robert Schultz on his farm. I was really lucky to meet this wonderful farmer. He's a local hero who has protected so much land in our area from development. A shy friend of mine who had come to visit us had met him on the Chicago to Ann Arbor train and told me he regretted not asking him if he could see his farm. So I offered to cold call him and ask, since my friend knew his name and it was in the old-fashioned telephone book. I love this man. He reminds me of Clint Eastwood and my dad and has a wickedly wry sense of humor. This one with a cat, that's Katha, our, another daughter. Katha and Butter, featuring our wonderful cat who thought he was a dog and followed each of our daughters on their newspaper routes each night. Butter had a stroke at about age 16 and completely rehabilitated himself, walking up and down the hall, leaning on the wall. He lived to 18. We were all there with him to say goodbye at his gentle demise. Katha is a lawyer now. She is the executive director of the Chicago Alliance Against Sexual Exploitation in Chicago and works on trafficking issues, human trafficking issues. And below is her daughter, Jane, reading in diapers. Jane was reading to herself with such lovely concentration. I wanted to capture her sweetness and focus. She doesn't mind now as a 13-year-old that I'm showing her in diapers. She's okay with it. This is one of my favorite paintings. This is Katha and Noah, who's now 18, and I call this After the Sleepless Night. Our daughter Katha had been up all night with Noah, who had a cold. I love the way he was holding her thumb, but I didn't even notice this when I took the picture, only when I began to paint it. This is a woman that I really loved when we were vacationing in Vermont. She was our neighbor. It's called Gladiolas for Next Season. Her name is Ruth. She prepares a huge gladiola garden every year and sells the flowers in a little stand on the roadside honor system. And every fall she digs up the bulbs and separates the baby bulbs from the mother bulbs for replanting for the next year. This one is of a friend and my husband in the high Sierras. When I first went to this cabin at 10,000 feet in Rock Creek Canyon, it was with my friend who was taking a break from her caregiving of her husband who had early Alzheimer's. I vowed to return to show my husband this gorgeous place, but this picture of him reading on the porch is now his only memory of it, as he too has Alzheimer's. But it was a very, very beautiful and special moment in time, spending 4 days there. This is my grandson, Noah, taking a summer's nap. He's age 6 here, fast asleep on the bottom bunk after a hard day of play at Camp Grandmapa. He scampered on a rock wall made of huge boulders when we were together, announcing, "These rocks have strength, and I'm getting strength from these rocks." Little philosopher. This is a family friend, Tom Morrison, who was in the psych clinic here at the U of M. A very dramatic guy, brilliant man, posing here in his living room. He and Alice are art collectors. Alice Brunner and he have been friends and neighbors for years, and whenever we go to their home, it's a feast for the eyes, as they have this incredibly beautiful collection of art on the walls everywhere. And finally, I guess this is the last one, Peggy Lippett. She was an Ann Arbor friend and colleague. Together we created and taught until she was 84. I met her when she was 70. We taught and we put together and created a parenting course called Becoming the Parent You Want to Be. We taught in her home, a wonderful venue that her husband Ron Lippett also used for years for his nurturing meetings with many in this community. Peggy became a Buddhist early in her life, before many in the U.S. had any inkling about Buddhism. She taught meditation in her home as well, and I think that activity infused their home with a lovely, peaceful feeling. She had a completely pixie-ish sense of humor and a hugely generous spirit, as did Ron. It was a huge gift in my life to know them both. So that's my 20 portraits here, and they've been held hostage in a closed building since February or March. And my fantasy is that they've been talking to each other and saying things like, "How did you get to be on this wall?" And "How did you know Pam?" And "Let me tell you about her." So I don't know if they've come alive, but they've been well protected, and I appreciate them being safe and sound and still on the wall. Thank you.